Every day, local government makes modern life possible. Water flows, roads are repaired, parks and playgrounds open and come to life. And behind each one of those services is a story of people who show up, care deeply, and lead with purpose, even when no one is watching. This is the Halting Winter Podcast, and it's part of the Halting Winter Project, a movement to restore pride, purpose, and participation in local government by sharing the stories that build belonging. I'm Seth Winterhalter, and every week I tell the stories that remind America where government really lives, locally, in our cities, our counties, and our communities. Before we hear today's conversation, I want to thank our founding sponsor, Tyler Technologies, a company that's been exclusively serving the public sector since 1998. From smarter budgeting to stronger resilience, Tyler Tech equips local governments with software and solutions that help leaders serve with clarity, efficiency, and impact. You can explore practical resources and hear the real success stories from communities across the country at tylertech.com/winter. That's tylertech.com/winter. Tyler Technologies, empowering the public sector to build stronger, more connected communities. Now, let's turn to today's conversation. My guest on the podcast today is Kevin Robinson, City Manager of Spencer, Iowa. Kevin, it's good to be back in the Midwest. Welcome to the podcast. A pleasure to have you on today.
Happy to be here, Seth.
We're going to have fun. You have a very unique path to city management. This is why I love the podcast. I love sharing these stories and encouraging young people, and not just young people, but even people who maybe, they've got a decade, 2 decades into their career, and they think, is this all there is? Maybe there's something else, right? How can we encourage people to look at local government and the cool opportunities are, the missional opportunities, so you get to impact people on a day-to-day basis in some really unique ways. We're going to unpack all that as we get to what you're up to in Spencer. But before that, we got to do what we do here on the Halting Winter Podcast. Take us back to the beginning, Kevin. Help us get to know you, just the person. Where were you born, and what when you think about childhood, what do you think shaped you and molded you into the person you are today?
So I was born and raised in Manchester, Iowa. It's a population 5,000 town in Northeast Iowa. It's on Highway 20 between Waterloo and Dubuque, Iowa, equidistant both ways. My family's 4 generations deep in that town on both sides. And so I grew up with both of my grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, everybody, really close. Both of my parents graduated from the same school that I attended. And so very much a multi-generational feel. And when you grow up, you don't know anything other than how you grow up, right? So that's my experience growing up. And my exposure to municipal government really came in the Boy Scouts of America. So I was a Cub Scout, Boy Scout. My parents are Scout leaders, and I'm an Eagle Scout. And so you have to take citizenship in the community, nation, and world as part of your merit badges to be an Eagle Scout. That's really my first exposure to government. The longest tenured mayor in Iowa, Milt Kramer, who just stepped down a couple of years ago, was a government teacher at our high school. So it was a little bit of a novelty. Our mayor was the longest running mayor in Iowa. And so just that exposure to, I think, service, governmental structure. I really enjoyed social studies, had some really formative teachers and coaches who were very good at crafting lessons about life, not just about sports or teaching. Most of them that I had as coaches in high school are actually in the Iowa Hall of Fame, football and wrestling, and multiple coaches at both sports. So just exposure to, I think, winning as well. So we were state champions twice in wrestling, once in football. And I just bring that up from the perspective of it's not about winning those championships. The championships were the byproduct of all the hard work and I would say intentional work that went into that process. And so that process led up to the point I had the opportunity also in college to play for one of the best college football coaches in America, Ron Shipper, who when he retired was, I think, number 2 or 3 on the list in the country for all-time wins as a head coach. He was a Division III coach. And so just that exposure to government, leadership, quality role models, I think developed a lifelong passion for service. And even when I was not directly in a leadership role in government. I served in government. So I've been on a compensation board at the county level for our county auditor to negotiate salaries. I was on the Civil Service Commission in Spencer, where we reviewed applicants for the PD and the fire department for probably 13 years. Always followed government. Went through Leadership Iowa when I was here in Spencer. That was a program that was constructed by Governor Ray in the 80s in Iowa. And it was in response to the farm crisis and people leaving the state of Iowa. And so the Association of Business and Industry in Iowa puts that on, and they take 40 people a year in the state. It's a 10-month course. You go to different parts of the state, different topics, different themes. And one of the principles of Leadership Iowa is to give back to your community, and especially in service. A lot of encouragement for elected service at whatever level. And so I think all of those things combined led me to the path of eventually running for mayor. I was mayor for 4 years, chose not to run. We had 2-year terms, chose not to run for a third term. And then a handful of years later, ended up in the chair as city manager. So kind of a...
It's going to be a great story. I can't wait to unpack it all. But let's go back. As you're growing up, something that's interesting, again, just kind of knowing the layout of your story. We're going to get to college, and after college, you work for the Boy Scouts of America, a nonprofit, I would assume. And so your nonprofit work, then you spend a decade in private sector, entrepreneurial business ownership work, and then you come into the public sector in a municipality. What's interesting is, especially in private sector, there's just in leadership, there's kind of competition. Like if you ever take a strength finders, I don't know if you're familiar with that assessment test. Competition's always number one. If you turn something into a competition for me, I'm in. Let's go. Let's get after it. And so I want to ask, because you mentioned sports and athletics growing up, but you mentioned 2 sports specifically that I played, football and wrestling, and which is unique. I think this is why I love kids being active, whether it's sports or music or ballet, whatever it is, getting around, being socially a part of things where you can learn team, but you can also learn individual competition. And so wrestling, it's a team sport, but you get points for your match that goes towards the team accumulation, but it's a very individual sport. Like no one's helping you. You're out there, right? Whereas football is an entire team sport. You can't throw the ball to yourself and run, right, for a touchdown. Right. And so looking back on that, was there something unique there of those 2 sports specifically that are so that have commonality, but also have a lot of differences in that individualism versus team that maybe shaped and prepared you for the journey ahead in your life that kind of does, again, a turn into each kind of sphere, nonprofit, private sector, public sector? Is there anything you took away growing up in athletics that maybe shaped or prepared you for what was ahead?
Yeah, good question. So here's how I would answer that. My sophomore year, we received a new high school football coach. And this coach came from Iowa City, which if people aren't familiar with the Midwest, that's home of the Hawkeyes. He was an assistant coach there, large metro school. And, we're a smaller school in rural Iowa. And he came in with this just different expectation level of performance. And we were not a school of consistent conference titles and state titles. And we'd never won a state. The only state title when he showed up my sophomore year, so this would be 1990, the only state championship the school had was like a 1956 cross-country state championship, right? Well, we went undefeated that year and got beat first round of the playoffs, but I'll never forget one of the 2-a-day practices, back when you could have 2 days, can't have them anymore. But it was hot, afternoon practice. We were dragging, and we had got 2/3 of the way through practice. We were in our offensive team set, and we were just not focused. We were running like a simple dive play, and we were goofing it up. And so he said, if you guys don't execute this, we're going to start practice over. Well, we don't really have a relationship with him at this point. He's brand new. We're like, I don't know, 6 practices into our relationship. So we don't execute. We're thinking we're going to reset the offensive period. So that's what we do. And he says, no, take your warm-up lap. We're starting practice over. And so that's what we did. And, one of the seniors piped off to him and he stopped. So he could have yelled back and just, exerted force, right? But he stopped practice, gathered everybody together, and went over the comment that was thrown his way. And the comment was, what do you expect us to be perfect? And so we get in a circle around him and he says, I don't expect you to be perfect. I expect you to strive for perfection. You'll never be perfect, but you need to strive for it. And once you stop doing that, your competition will, take over where you want to be. And we ran practice again. And I will tell you, like, the energy level that we put forth restarting practice was at a way higher level than what it was when we were just dogging and dragging. And so the takeaway there was so much of your performance is A, your mindset, and then B, your strive for perfection is greater than trying to be perfect. Like, you need to continue to always try to execute, right? And then, of course, wrestling season, and we had a new wrestling coach at the time, two of them, assistant, head coach. They were both from the same high school. So Jeff Voss and Scott Lehrer, they're both from Clarksville High School, and both very successful. Anyway, we ended up winning 2 state championships in 1991. I was not the varsity heavyweight at that time. I was a JV heavyweight, but they won the individual and the team title. So now all of a sudden there's this little, hey, our school, we can be state champions. So coming into the fall football season, like, that was our goal. And so we're a 3A school. So in Iowa, A, 1A, 2A, 3A, 4A, we were a 3A school. We were a small 3A school. We only had about 20 guys on the team. And so when we would run practices, we'd have to have coaches fill in on the scout team. And we had a lot of close games that season. And coming into the state championship game, we were not ranked. And the team we were playing was ranked. They were ranked number 1. And they had 50 pointed, I think, 3 or 4 different opponents that season. And we shut them down, beat them 27-11. And that team was actually Spencer, where I'm currently at. And so that was actually my first exposure to Spencer, Iowa. But what that whole journey taught me that year was just this continual, you're never out of a game, right? First game, double overtime in Maquoketa, we kick a field goal to win it. Benton Community, we're down going into the fourth quarter, and Reese Morgan was their head football coach. He went on to coach O-line at the University of Iowa for, 15 years or so. We came back to win that game. Playoff game, Regis was the only school to beat us during the normal season. They beat us. We dropped the touchdown last minute. Well, we beat them 14-13 second round of the playoffs. The next round, we beat Waverly Shell Rock, who beat us 51-15 the year before, first round of the playoffs. Called a play change in the huddle. So instead of running a flag, ran a post, and we ended up winning 9-3, caught the touchdown. I didn't, of course, but our slot back, Jeff Soppy, caught the touchdown with, I think, 34 seconds left. And we win by 3 points. And so, the perspective of the outsider was that we're limping in, right? We're just barely alive getting into this. How did they get here to this championship game? They've got no business being here. They're just going to get steamrolled by the best team in the state. And, everybody believed that except a handful of people from our town and us. We didn't believe that, right? And we won 27-11. We never trailed in the football game. And that whole journey taught me, A, you're never out. And then, B, we had one of our coaches made a t-shirt after that season, and the front of the t-shirt said, ratings are opinion, championships are fact. And that served me well, I think, in business, in relationships, in life, in civic leadership, just this mindset that, the scoreboard really doesn't matter. Your approach, your consistency, your belief, just keep hammering at it, and you'll accomplish it, even when others think you might not, or they think something is monumentally just unachievable. It's really not their opinion that matters. It's the opinion that you have inside, and like the way our coach has led us was very, I think, intentional and meaningful. And there was such a great takeaway what a benefit for us as participants in that journey to be able to take their knowledge and use it, for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
There's a picture of myself and one of my best friends after the game. The newspaper snapped it, and we're embracing each other and putting our arms up. And I tell people, if you could bottle that feeling and like give that to every kid who ever played a sport or did an activity, or there's state championships won every year, but for those small number of people who can experience that, you wish that for everybody. Like just that feeling of a big accomplishment, a big win, the culmination of the hard work, right? It's not what happened that day. That day is just the outcome of a whole lot of work that nobody sees. And I think that's very relevant to accomplishment, especially in the municipal world, where timelines are typically can't run at the same pace that they can in the private sector. In the private sector, there's a lot more levers and options available to you to change a strategy, where in the municipal world, you really got to be very diligent on the front end of the strategy you're picking, and then be disciplined while you're executing that to get to the fruition of it. Because a lot of the things in municipal government take years. A goal setting session in year A might not come to fruition until year F. And most people don't have the patience or the wherewithal. We live in such an instant gratification society where if we're planning something in February, we want to accomplish it by June. Well, that's just not how the world works sometimes.
We're living through one of the biggest shifts local government has ever seen. Not political, not cultural, it's digital. AI, automation, cybersecurity, cloud migration, none of this used to be part of your job description. But now it's the choppy water every city and county is swimming in. And for many leaders, it feels less like innovation and more like what's going to break next, and will we survive it? Here's the truth most people won't say out loud. A lot of governments aren't afraid of the cloud. They're afraid of getting it wrong. Because the stakes are real. You're trying to protect data, modernize ancient systems, improve service, and keep your residents happy, all while staying under budget and out of the fire. That's why I appreciate the team at Tyler Technologies. They don't talk about the cloud like it's magic pixie dust. They break it down. What to migrate, when to migrate, how to get long-term value without blowing your budget or burning out your people. They've helped more local governments make this transition than anyone I know, and they've put all their best insights into a new ebook about cloud adoption and strategy. If you're trying to lead your organization into the future instead of getting dragged there, you got to check this out. Their newest guide is called Modern Governments Live in the Cloud, and you can download it for free at tylertech.com/winter. That's tylertech.com/winter, WINTER. tylertech.com/winter. Go check it out. Download the free guide. Now, back to the conversation. Well, especially in municipal realities, I mean, many of the city managers we've had on here talk about how, I remember Daniel Doolin, who's now in Manhattan, Kansas. I think the title of her episode was Working in Generations. The idea that you will start work and never finish it because you'll be to somewhere else, or electeds, you might not be, unless you're that mayor who's, served their entire life. Like you might be in the middle of projects, carrying it forward to the next leg. It's like a relay race. You might be on the end where you've got to figure out, well, I was never even a part of this project, and it's planning and it's a strategy. And now I'm the one bringing it across the finish line. So it's the unique reality in the municipal world. Yeah. That things, especially when you're talking about infrastructure projects that take years and all kinds of, and we'll hit all of a sudden snags, we'll get to that in your story. All of a sudden you have an epic flood and everything gets put on hold. Everything is like, and then it can change everything. What does this mean? Where are we going? So
right.
That's really good. So your story is going to, I have to be careful because we could dive into the weeds. I know this is going to be great because already there's so many good things I want to get to, but this will be 3 hours long, Joe Rogan-esque. So let's talk about, I love that you have unpacked this a little bit because again, it seems like that high school experience really already started to shape and mold in some really unique ways. Obviously an Eagle Scout shows discipline and determination that opened up your eyes to some things. What was Kevin thinking when you go to Central College? What were you thinking? What were you interested in? What did you think the future held for Kevin's profession as you're in undergrad?
So three things. My life goal was to be a social studies teacher, a high school football coach, and a high school wrestling coach in small town Iowa. Coach some, kind of very competitive year in, year out type program. And that little taste of a high school title wanted me to try to go someplace where we could win a national title at the collegiate level. And Central College at that time had that caliber of team and coaching staff and, things of that nature. So the weeding out of where to go play after high school was pretty simple for me. There was always only a handful of places and that checked the boxes. And, Ron Shipper, just do a little Wikipedia Google search on him if you're listening. You'll see his numbers, but here's what sold me on Central College. So we're at our house in Manchester. So coach drove up and was talking to my parents and I. He could have cared less if I'm in the room. Like, he's talking to my parents, right? Telling them all about the experience I'm going to have and this, that, the other. And then, so he says two things. These two things sealed the deal, one more than the other. So, and they're both important. And anybody who played for him can tell you he said these things. He said, if you come play for me, you're going to be a gentleman, a student, and an athlete, in that order. And then he looked right at me and he said, I'm not even sure you're good enough to play for us, but I will give you a set of pads and you can determine your own future. Now, that's a very different message than most of the coaches that are out on the recruiting trail. They've already got you slotted in a particular position, and here's who's ahead of you, and here's how many years I think you'll start, right? But not Coach Shipper. So get down to campus my freshman year, and on that team, as with most college teams, but that team in Iowa, everybody's all conference, everybody's all state, everybody's good, everybody's strong. You're just another one, on the team. So you got to make your path, right? And the part about athletics, especially college athletics, for me anyway, was developing this relationship with people that you come away with very close bonds with, but that you're also trying to take their place. So there's only so many spots. There's 11 on offense, 11 on defense, and 11 on special teams. And I played O-line. And so you are battling every day with the people that are your brothers that you want to take their job and they want to take your job. And there's a mutual respect there of each of you want the same thing, but you don't dislike each other because of that. And I think that lesson served me well, especially in business, where I owned companies in several different industry segments. And, you want your company to be successful, which means you're taking market share away from somebody else. But at the same time, those are your peer group. And so you can have friendly, competitive relationships. You don't have to be a jerk. And at some point in time, you might need each other to service a client or do something, or, so I think the business world is also this healthy circle of fierce competition, but also respect for your competition, which is what, football in college was. So you not only had that, of course, the teams you were playing, but really in college, in any sport, you have that intensity of like, you're not there to waste time. It's not an activity like in high school. Like this is business, and you are there. You want some fruit for the amount of time you put in. And so it just ups your level. So when I get there my freshman year, Glenn Hummel from Grundy Center, Iowa, was the Division III preseason player of the year. And he's a defensive tackle, right? And Mark Kakmarinsky, you could Google Mark's name. So Mark played on a couple different NFL teams. He was the tailback. And you're just like, I'd never played across the board with like that level of people. So we have an alumni game. So former players come back, and, Coach Shipper comes in, and so I'm a freshman, and he's like, okay, offense, this is in our pre-game meeting. Don't want anybody to be intimidated, but all 11 starters on defense are first team All-America. And Mike Stumberg, the nose tackle, he played preseason for the Seahawks. He was Division III Player of the Year. Chris Reese, the linebacker, was the fastest person to ever wear a central uniform. Good luck. And then he just like walked out, right? And so you're like, oh. And that was really my first exposure to consistent, high level driven people. So like in high school, you've got a handful maybe of alphas on a team, like true alphas, right? But in college, at top tier programs, at different levels, everybody's alpha. Like everybody is, steel sharpens steel, right? And so just that working through that process of learning from people who were good at their craft, you understand, you might have thought you were, good at your craft, but hey, junior, you got some work to do here, right? So you start to work, and you start.
Isn't that?
Go ahead.
Oh, isn't that the interesting thing? I just want to hit. I want to highlight that moment of because I think there are some kids like in my town. I remember we had an all-star baseball player. In fact, he was scouted by the MLB. MLB was coming out to our games. Just like, who is this? And his freshman year, amazing. Sophomore year, amazing. Junior year, all of a sudden, like, I don't know, got bored with it, whatever. And then I still kind of made it. And I think that went to college, but then again, all of a sudden it was like, I'm not the standout. I actually have to work because everyone is equal. So it's always interesting to see that. Yeah. When you go to the college, a good college, it resets, and you got to find the next gear of, am I actually going to level up, or was I just leaning on that just natural talent and ability? And so it seems like you faced that lesson, kind of tasted that.
Yeah. So here was my first taste of it was in 2-a-day practice. So Glenn Hummel, the person I told you about from Grundy Center, Ryan Suckamil, who's from West Branch, Iowa, fastest nose guard I ever saw play. And then, so we're doing a 2-on-2 drill with the running back behind us with the dummies with the running lane, right? So Matt Banstra, who's a sophomore from Pella, all-state heavyweight wrestler, all-state football player, great guy. He's a sophomore. I'm a freshman. Him and I are paired up here. And Mark Kakmarinsky, that I told you about from West Bend Mallard, was the tailback. And so offense versus defense, right? Matt and I were juiced, so we're the young pups. Suckamil and Hummel were seniors, right? So you got seniors going, they're just like tired of it, right? Like whatever. And so it's the last drill before the water break. I don't think their effort was probably where coach wanted it. Matt and I were playing like it was the Super Bowl. And, where are these young bucks going to make a point, right? And we had success. So I would say we stalemated them, and Mark was able to get through. And so the win went to the offense, right? So I'm feeling pretty good about myself, right? And Coach Shipper is just madder than a hornet. And the next thing you hear is him yelling back on the ball. Okay, well, that's the first time you're like, in my head, I'm thinking, I'm going to get their best now. Like, I just had the benefit of not receiving their best. I'm for sure going to get their best. So we lined back up, and when I tell you that my feet went ass over apple carts over my head, like they ran a twist stunt and blew Mark up in the backfield, and I was like, okay. Like, lesson learned. Another good memory from football, we're doing our offensive lineman warm-ups, so everybody gets in a circle. You're just doing these body squats. Coach Shipper walks up and he says, gentlemen, you're the offensive line. You should be able to walk up to the line of scrimmage, tell the defense to play, tell them the snap count, and it's not going to matter because you're going to out-execute them. And then he just like walks away. Like, here's this little nugget. Take it. And that really, for whatever reason that day, that really struck with me as far as like, we get so wound up, I think sometimes in life trying to out strategize people, out strategize the competition, overthink things. And, here's this guy walking in saying, here's how you can be successful. You can tell somebody exactly what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and when you're going to do it. And it doesn't matter because you're just going to out execute them. And all of a sudden, this like complexity got like super simple. Like, okay, we just need to focus on the execution of it. We just have to do it better than them. And that might sound oversimplified, but I think it's you hear turns, whether it's in sports or other things, like the ability to go fast, play fast. And the coaches that really have the success with that are the ones who can take complex and make it simple. And you cleared your mind and you just focus and you play fast. You're not trying to overthink things. And I think from a leadership perspective, whether it's in business or municipal government, that's critical, to take the complex and not make it complex, right? So like for me, how I handle that is I try to take my complex time in private. So mornings, evenings, maybe like 10 or 15 minutes during the day where I'm trying to take this very complex thought process and just try to challenge myself about how do I make this simple? Now, that's not to say dumbing down. That's a very different thing. But how do you keep a message intense and purposeful, but not overcomplicated? How do you give a directive that is clear, concise, and purposeful versus like a long rambling, explanation of something? And it took me 40 years, 45 years. I'm 50. I really didn't get intentional about that until the last probably 2 to 4 years. I would over talk, probably still do, but yeah, but I think, I guess the point is all of that goes back to, this probably September day on a practice field in Pella, Iowa by some football coach who's one of the best at his craft. Here's a little snippet for who Coach Shipper was. So after the season, you'd have individual meetings with him, right? So I go to his office in the athletic complex. And he's talking on the phone. He waves me into his office, this will date me, but I sit down waiting for him to get off the phone. It's a Thursday afternoon, like 2 p.m. And he goes, "Okay, Joe, talk to you next week." I go, "Who's that?" He goes, "Joe Paterno." Now, we're some like little Division III school in Pella, Iowa. There's no 4-lane road at that time, even to us, right? And at that time, this is the mid 90s. Penn State was top 3-5 program in the country. And I'm like, "Coach, you were not just talking to Joe Paterno." He's like, "Yeah, we talk every Thursday." And so like, I guess there's another little takeaway for me was here's a Division III head football coach talking to a Division I head football coach. And I believe there's a municipal correlation here. So they weren't coaches at different levels when I saw that phone conversation. These were two craftsmen talking about their craft. It's the same game. The bodies are bigger in Penn State. They're faster, right? But it's the same football. It's the same field dimension. It's the same goalposts. Same, like these were not like a coach here and a coach here talking to. These were peers. And I think you really see that, especially in municipal government, where it's not really, one could argue it's harder administratively in a smaller town than it is a large town because you don't have the staff size that you have in a large town. But I think you see that intermixing and sharing of stories and best practices and things of that nature, especially in municipal government, because the size really doesn't matter. There's a council in every town. There's administrators, there's clerks, there's streets, there's sewers, so I think when municipal leaders, whether they're elected or staff, when they cross collaborate with each other, right? It's not small town talking to big town. It's just hey, we're having a challenge with this, this, and this. And hey, we just went through that, and that. And so let's talk about that. And that reminds me a lot of that phone conversation that I watched, had the fortune to watch Coach Shipper and Coach Paterno just having a conversation. I don't know, it was wild.
It's such a great point because, again, it's not like, as we go into AI, it's not like Dallas is using Chat GPT awesome and some little town in the middle of nowhere is using Chat GPT small town.
Right.
Like, we're all using the same infrastructure, all these technologies, all these resources to keep up with roads and sewer and water, etc.
Mm-hmm.
We're all using the same thing. Like you say, it's just it's a matter of numbers, really.
Mm-hmm.
Size of acreage, zeros behind the infrastructure needs, whatever that is. And so, and when it comes to community engagement, it's definitely like, how do you, whether you have 5,000 people to engage or 500,000 people, it's still people, and they all have unique opinions and desires and wants. And so, yeah, it's such a great point. So you leave Central College, and the social studies teacher who's going to become a coach ends up at the Boy Scouts of America. Yeah. What happens there?
Well, 1997, starting teacher wage in Iowa was $18,000. And if you picked up a couple assistant or middle school type coaching positions, that's probably another $500 to $800. So you're still under 20 grand. And I had student loans and was struggling to try to figure out how to financially, outside of having like 3+ roommates, because I didn't really have the desire to teach in my hometown. So like living at home, I didn't want to live at home and things of that nature. I wanted to, go experience something somewhere else, and made the finalist in one interview. And then my dad had talked to me, and he had volunteered. My parents both had volunteered at multiple levels of scouting. So the local like troop pack level, but then district council. And my dad even did some regional volunteer stuff through the central region in the United States. And he said, you should think about being a professional scout. Like, well, I mean, I know there was one executive at my Eagle ceremony, but like you can make a living doing that. And he's like, yeah. And so it sounds very much, campfire activity-ish, but it's actually very corporate. So it's very similar to in the Midwest, 2 main grocery store chains like Fairway and Hy-Vee. So like if you're going to work for those and move up to get your own store, you're going to probably be at 3 to 5 different stores throughout your career, right? In different towns, and you're going to move every 4 to 5 years. And the Boy Scouts of America is very similar to that. So our job was to recruit membership, raise money, make sure the camps are full, business type things. It was very corporate executive and goal driven. So we had critical achievements. We were very statistically measured on our performance, and your statistical performance determined your pay raises. So it was very much a corporate sales position, and it paid $28,000, 10 grand more than, plus I got mileage. Oh, all right. I wanted to go west, wanted to go Oregon, Idaho. Ended up, there's a very high turnover in the first, 6 months of that profession. So typically they won't hire you very far away from where you're from because of that. And I ended up in Northwest Iowa. Out of Sioux City was the council. So I had 10 counties in Northwest Iowa. I lived in Spencer, where I'm currently at. I came out here on a 3-year plan. And in 1998, August 1st, 1998. And I tell people I failed miserably at that. It's 2025 and I'm still here. And so it was a slam dunk. I was only going to be here 3 years because at that time, the council was very small. There was no promotion opportunities. And in that profession, you get promoted after your 3rd year from district executive to senior district executive. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'll come out, punch the clock, do my time, achieve my goals, and then I'm out. I'll get west. And we merged about 2 years in, we merged with the Omaha Council, and that's a metro council. So I went from a staff of 4 professionals to a staff of like 38 to 40, and they had upward mobility. And so what happened was I got promoted without my authorization. Essentially, they just processed my paperwork, sent it to the region, and, gave me a memo. Hey, congratulations, you're now a senior district executive. And I'm like, I don't want to be here. And they're like, well, you're here. And in that 2-year time frame of senior district executive is when I met my wife. So she's a school teacher here. She's 10 years older than I am, and she had her master's plus 30 when she was about 28 to 30 years old. So she was on the pay matrix, she was at the top end of it. And so we got married and decided. I did that job for 6 years. Our daughter was born. So we got married. Well, it's a fast story. So our first date was September 21st, 2001. We were engaged November 3rd, 2001. We got married March 23rd, 2002. And then our daughter was born March 31st, 2003. So it's like bang, bang, bang.
Get it done.
Yeah, get it done, right? And so what that did though, so when my daughter was born, I was gone 3 weekends a month. I was, 3 out of 5 weeknights. I had evening meetings. And so when I was single, that workflow was fine. But once I got married and had a newborn, and my wife has MS, and so it's like, okay, this is just not working. I can't, and my responsibilities kept getting bigger. Now I was covering kind of all of Western Iowa for a couple different staff assignments, and I got to transition out of this. And so as with what happens in most of rural America, if you want to live where you live and there's limited job opportunities, you typically end up taking job positions that you might not have thought you would take.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a outside sales business development position open at one of our local banks. I knew most of the people at the bank. Thought, well, I don't have a finance background, but I know people. So I'll apply, and got that job and did that for 4.5 years, I suppose, 5 years about. And that bank leadership had changed over. So the people who hired me were at the end of their career, and the new people that came in eliminated the position I was in. And so that, set me adrift. Got a phone call from a friend who was on the Red Cross board, and the Red Cross had gotten a regional rural grant to bring on fundraising as a kind of a full-time focus. So at that time, the Red Cross did a really good job disaster fundraising, but their sustaining fundraising, wasn't awesome. And my background in fundraising with the Boy Scouts aligned with what their need was. So came on with them, and then ended up transitioning to a former bank customer. And then that bank customer ended up being my business partner in several different business ventures over 15 to 16 years. And we ended up doing a bunch of startups, buying companies, flipping companies, selling companies. Another partner came in, and we started a private equity kind of boutique group, and did a lot of different unrelated businesses to each other, but they were all opportunity based. And so just kind of a little bit of a wild ride. It's not one that I forecasted or scripted or anything like that. It just kind of happened.
It's so wild. I love it. And so again, you spend a decade kind of doing this entrepreneurial business owner, thing with a variety of different things. And during that, it leads you into two terms, like you said, as mayor.
Mm-hmm.
What, again, let's talk about Spencer for a minute. This is northwest part of Iowa. I think it's about 3 hours to Des Moines. I spent a lot of time in Des Moines. In my college, I went to Springfield, Missouri undergrad, but I had friends in Des Moines, and we did a lot of like traveling. I was part of like a drama comedy group, and we were up there a bunch.
Mm-hmm.
And so very familiar with the area, and not with Spencer. So you're a ways away. Again, I think it's 11,000 plus people in Spencer now.
Mm-hmm.
And so what led you to run for office? What was that? Again, you're busy. You got things going on. I'm sure, they're always trying to get, electeds are trying to, let's get people who own stuff, maybe there's some pressure there, but mayor, what was that about?
Well, I always, I told you at the beginning, I always had a passion for government and followed government. And, even when I first moved to town, I'm always like, I'm the political junkie that on local cable access would actually like watch the council meetings. I just enjoy the process. Right. And, I find it fascinating. And so I was always kind of tapped in and tuned in. And then I was at the bank when I went through Leadership Iowa. In fact, one of the bank customers here in town, Toby Shine, Shine Brothers, Toby recently passed away, had suggested to me and another person in town, Steve Pick, who's the current CEO of the utility company here, You guys should really look at applying to Leadership Iowa. I didn't know what Leadership Iowa was. I didn't know anything about it. Did a little research on it. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, Toby was heavily involved with the Association of Business and Industry and uh, applied and got accepted. So I told you one of their focuses is, dive deep into service. So when I was at the bank, I talked to our bank president, the guy who hired me, Gary Tolzman. He has since passed on. Gary was on board with it. He was supportive of it. Sure. But, it's a sensitive thing to be an elected official. And so let's talk through that. When Gary retired, that was the timing of kind of the election cycle. And I was still planning on doing it. But the new bank leadership, who's also has since retired, was not really on board with that idea. They just felt that which I understand, they felt that the risk to the current customer base and potential customer base, it was just too high profile and too much of a potential conflict of interest to be involved in local politics. Okay. So that was my first time. Like I had got to the point, I had a steering committee. I had some pretty well-respected business people who were running my campaign. We were prepped. We had 2 different meetings setting the timelines up and everything. I met with the current mayor and let him know that, who had not been mayor all that long, that I wasn't running against him. I wanted to serve and, want to give the people a choice, and wasn't mad or anything like that about anything he'd done, just was on my heart to serve. So the bank gave me that, information of not being super excited about it. And so I just withdrew, and I never got to the point of actually filling papers out or anything like that. So then, this 2008 is when I left the bank. Fall 2008 is when I went out to work with one of my former bank customers who ended up becoming a business partner. So I spend this time from like 2008, 2009 of being heavily involved in the community, like on the theater board, Pheasants Forever president, Main Street board president, right? Like on down the line, like just what you would see in a normal community of somebody who's involved. I was just jaded and, I'm like, okay, I'm going to pour my energy into developing businesses. Like I always had this, I never thought I was ever, I would ever have the ability to ever be a business owner. Like, that was for other people. I was always going to like have a job, right? So I really craved the challenge of it and decided to resign and kind of retract away from most of my community involvement. And I spent from there from 2009 to 2016, 17, really absent from the community scene. So at some point in time, we were running 3 to 5 businesses at the same time. And 1 or 2 of those are going to be startups. One of them is going to be a turnaround. One of them is going to be, we're prepping it for acquisition. But I'm working 60 to 75 hours a week and didn't mind it.
Mhm.
Like I liked the grind, and really was, once I started from scratch, like literally card table, laptop, folding chair, and ended up selling that company for a decent amount. I'm like, okay, yeah, I can do this. And so it's like, well, I did this over here in this industry. Can I go do it in this industry? Can I do it in this industry? Can I do it in this industry? And these were not like daisy chain connected. So you're talking everything from a document mobile shredding company to an ammunition company to a golf supply company to a beverage company to an auto parts store. Like these just very different ecosystems of being unconnected to each other. And the answer is, yeah, you can do it because the principles apply.
Mm.
So the institutional knowledge might be different, the industry knowledge might be different, but the premises of how to treat people, how to organize a company, how to establish your KPIs, how to figure out what really matters, like that process is really the same. Because you can hire people who know the weeds of whatever you're in. You're really more the architect of it, right? And these were small companies. I mean, we're talking 8 and under employees. We're not talking, thousands of employees. But so Anyway, I get to this this point in like 2016 where I really missed this like civic involvement. Just really I felt like I was not I still had an unfilled commitment within myself of something I needed to finish. And it was always kind of in the back of my mind, but the timing was never right. So my daughter and my son are 6 years apart, and my wife's career. And I told you, I'm kind of the one that ran the kids around and, took care of them, that kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay, I gotta time this thing. Well, I had this window where my daughter was in middle school, 8th grade. My son was 6 years younger. I can make a commitment here for 2 years or 4 years and serve. So I'm going to try. And my mom died in 2017 suddenly from a blood infection. And so my dad was still alive, but I kind of felt like, well, two things. You never know how long you're going to be around. But then number two, like, yeah, I just need to do this. I need to quit thinking about it, and I just need to do it, period. And, so I kind of call around to people I knew and put a structure together and filled the paperwork out and executed the plan that I had started in 2007. Met with the mayor, who was the same person who it was in 2007. So I would have been 42, 41, 42. I just told him, like in the city hall parking lot, hey, I'm going to run, and I wish you good luck. I hope you do well, but I'm running because I want to serve. And so developed a message and a campaign and a timeline and a strategy and executed that, and served 4 years. Two kind of wild things that happened when I was mayor. We had a Black Lives Matters rally here in town. So you think rural Iowa, not a big deal. Well, this was off the heels of some of the really violent ones that had happened. And the national movement wasn't here. It was, some local folks, but there were, 600 to 700 marchers. We had DCI snipers, security. I coordinated things with the organizers, and, we they wanted me to give a speech, and I'm like, no. And then I thought about it. I'm like, okay, I can do that. So that was wild. And then in COVID, of course, and anybody who was a mayor or administrator, but especially I think a mayor during that time frame in Iowa, Governor Reynolds got up and the press conference where she announced her shutdown of businesses and had the list. And this meeting, I think, was like at 4:15, something like that in the afternoon. And we're all sitting on the web call, just like, what? And then it's not the state's phone that starts ringing from the daycare provider and the beautician, the barber. It's our phones. Hey, do I have to not be in business tomorrow? And so just that whole thing was wild. And my dad died during COVID, 2020, April 2020, and he's 4 hours away. And my brother lives just to the north of me, and so we were taking turns. He had terminal cancer, but he was unofficial because he never wanted to be diagnosed with it. But he didn't want hospice, so my brother and I would take turns every 4 days. He'd go take care of him, and then I'd go take care of him. And so from January to April, that's what we did. And I don't know how other states did it, but in Iowa, the governor put regions together, and then they were watching COVID numbers per region, and they talked about shutting down the travel system, the roads. If an area got too high, there were a lot of commerce down and travel. And so my brother and I were planning out like gravel roads and county roads, and how do we get home and avoid towns where we could get held up or stopped. And then, Dad didn't want to, we couldn't take him to the hospital or the emergency room. We'd never see him again. Like it was getting wild. And in fact, one time I ran a council meeting at a rest stop halfway between Manchester and Spencer, because everything was web based. We were running remote meetings. And so it's what I did. I pulled over and, ran the council meeting from a truck stop. So, I just bring that up because it was kind of wild, right? Like just, you don't normally experience that kind of stuff. But got to the point where our parts store We bought it right before it went on auction in 2019, 2018, 19, something like that. Been here since the 70s, one location store, and they were just going to liquidate, auction everything off. And so my partner and I bought it, and ended up getting acquired by another competitor here. But after COVID, like supply chains were disrupted, price matrices were disrupted. We were not doing well. We're like a lot of small businesses where you're barely making it anyway. And then if you sustain 6 to 12 months of kind of downturning cash flows, I cashed in 2 401ks and didn't take a paycheck for 7 months so that I didn't lose any staff. I had a small staff, but if I lost them, we'd lose the store. And because if their institutional knowledge walked out of the door, then there's nobody to sell parts, because I don't know parts, right? I know business. So anyway, we get through that, but I just tell you that to say that was the largest driver of my decision to not run for a third term. Was that, no, I need to focus my time on the business. And then it wasn't, end of January, February that next year was when I got the call to be acquired. Had I known that call was coming, I might have served another 2 years. But so didn't run again for a third term. Talked to 2 different people to run before I announced I wasn't going to run, which was end of June, early July. One of them was a former council person who is our current mayor, got elected. So that Mayor Bumgars has done a far better job than I did. He's a lifelong social studies teacher, just knows a lot about government, was on the city council for 12 or 14 years before. And he's done a phenomenal job. But so the selling of that parts store is what takes me to the cemetery. So I'm at the end of like a 15-year run of just a grind. And I only had 2 other businesses left that I owned shares in, but they were kind of absentee. And I told my wife, I'm like, I have to have a place to just go work for a little while. Like I don't want to do another business at this point in time. I'm just too exhausted, like just spent. And I'm looking at the newspaper, and there's one ad from the city, cemetery superintendent positions open. And I'm like, oh, Tim must have left, So I know everybody. I called down to City Hall and I'm like, hey, is the position open? Talking to our HR director, and Jessica's like, yeah. I said, I think I'd like to apply. I said, I'm not really qualified to do it per se, but it's a good balance of, like, in all my companies, I'm very kinesthetic. So I would run the equipment, drive the trucks. Like I love that hands-on, stuff. And I'm like, cemetery is intriguing because you're dealing with people in their time of need. So you need that social side of interaction, but then also, you're running heavy equipment, excavators and tractors and, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I could go do that. And of course I had a little IPERS built up from being a public official. I'm like, hey, I can continue that. It was desirable because I had liquidated, most of 2 of my 3 401ks. I'm like, yeah, that might be a good retirement strategy, kind of backfill that stuff. And so I went and did that. And it was interesting. I used the same approach and the same process at the cemetery as I did in all my businesses. Like, okay, here's what we're doing. Here's how we need to better organize. Here's the processes we need to improve. Here's the, the details of that. Here's the analysis. I treated it like a turnaround company. And it was invigorating. There's a certain freedom that comes from popping your earbuds in, hopping on a grasshopper mower, and taking care of somebody's final resting place for a visit. I tell people what I learned being a cemetery superintendent is, I think weddings and cemeteries are very similar from the standpoint of expectation. So when you get a wedding invitation in the mail and you show up at that wedding, you have a certain level of expectation that everything is on point. People are sharply dressed. The bride looks beautiful. The decorations, the ambiance, you like, when you go to a wedding, you're going there for an experience, and the reception is a time of reflection and, all this stuff. Right. Well, cemeteries are very much similar from the standpoint of, Typically there's your regular visitors, but most of the time somebody who's coming to a grave is coming there either once a year or on a particular day, or sometimes somebody's had a hard day. And so, they want to go visit a loved one, to spend some time there. Right. But when they come into the cemetery, their expectation of that 3 foot by 10 foot space is that it is immaculate. It's on point. There shouldn't be weeds there. Like, it should look well kept. And not only the specific grave, but just the whole facility itself. And we had two cemeteries. One's 48 acres, one is 11 acres. So they're not small parcels. The one goes back to 1876. And so 10,000 gravestones, takes 82 man hours just to weed eat the cemetery once. There's all these like logistical things that have to occur to make everything on point for people. And, they deserve that experience, when they show up. And so, I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself, but our city manager, who I actually hired when I was mayor, I was on my way out. Dan was on his way in because Amanda had gone to Watertown. So she leaves in June, July. We end up hiring Dan in November. And he was still there, but he had announced his retirement. And so springtime, he had said September 30th will be my last day. And so I called our HR director and I called the mayor and I said, hey, I think I might have an interest in the position. I'd like to be a candidate, and just let me know when the window is open to apply. And I'd like to apply. Now, get in a time machine, rewind yourself all the way back to when I first moved to town in 1998. One of my mentors was Clint Fraley, who has since passed, but he was the Clay County Conservation Board officer. Clint was also the district executive for the Boy Scouts here in the 70s. And so we had this mutual connection of scouting and the job. And Clint mentioned to me, you should really think about being a city manager. I'm 20, I don't know, 4, 5, something like that. And I'm like, well, Clint, I have a teaching degree, and I work for a nonprofit. I don't think I'm exactly qualified to be a city manager. And he's like, no, you don't understand. It's pretty much the same stuff. You have committees and boards and people, and like the work process flow is very much similar to what you do right now. It's just in a different arena. So I just tucked it away and well, I don't have the money to go back and get a different degree and, whatever. And so I just tucked it in the back of my mind. Well, in another little twist, so Dan Payne was Spencer, Iowa's first city manager in the early to mid 90s. Okay. When I move out here in 98, Dan Payne's not the city manager, Dean Torreson is. Okay. So I get 4 years into my scouting career, my territory gets expanded to Fort Dodge, Iowa. And so I'm still living in Spencer, but I cover Fort Dodge. Dan Payne is the economic development director in Fort Dodge, kind of a retired gig, part-time, So I meet Dan because Dan helped with the fundraising for Boy Scouts. So I meet Dan, we have this mutual connection, So Dan is the second person that says, you should really think about being a city manager. You'd be good at being a city manager. Same answer, right? I don't have a degree. I'm not qualified, that's that, right? So then fast forward to when I served with Amanda. So I got elected during the same cycle that Amanda got hired. So she starts January 1st. I start January 1st. She's city manager. I'm the mayor. And so, we developed this relationship of both being new. Well, I'd been in town quite a while. We were both new to official roles in government, right? And so she'd been a city manager in Canton before and then Whiting, but she'd never been in a town this large. And so we're both kind of cutting our teeth on the whole, municipal leadership, yin yang of elected official, staffer. But the thing that Amanda and I share in common is both this junky love for government, just this process of government. Government's so messy, it's beautiful, and through our conversations, Amanda had mentioned, you should really think about this. You'd be good at it. Jump back to Leadership Iowa. One of the participants in Leadership Iowa is Mark Jackson, who's the city manager in Story City, Iowa. he would be a really good interview on your podcast. So I called Mark. I'm like, hey, Mark, now this is before the flood, but it's in 2024, and it's before I called our HR person. And Mark and I had stayed in contact over the years. And I said, hey, Mark, just like a brutally honest question, which Mark's the best one to ask that to, because he'll give you a brutally honest answer, whether you want it or not. So, do you think that I would have the skill set to be a city manager? Like, would I have the aptitude to bring to the table the skills that are necessary to execute the job in Spencer? Mark's reply was, well, forget about Spencer. Don't look at it that way. So he said, if I got a phone call from somebody in wherever, Iowa, and you had applied to be a city manager there, and you put me as a reference, and they asked me what I thought about your skill sets to do the job, what would I say? So then Mark gave me his thoughts, and I took those into consideration. And then I'm like, yeah, I'm going to call our HR director and tell her, hey, in the fall, when the window's open, I'd love to be an applicant. But then, of course, we got a little bit of rain, and things changed.
Oh, again, a massive flood, right? And so here's kind of again, you've mentioned some things. I want to just for the listening audience. So you've referenced Amanda Mack, who's now a city manager in Harrisburg, South Dakota. Her episode is 147 of the podcast. Amanda is one of my favorite people on planet Earth. It's just amazing. And so again, she's a city manager. You're the mayor. You become the cemetery superintendent. You experience this crazy flood, massive flood. It submerged like a huge part of the city.
65% of the town.
65% of the town. What did that? And then during this time, you serve as the interim deputy city manager, the interim city manager. Obviously, you become the city manager in December of 2024. So we're celebrating a year in the seat.
Yeah.
I want to talk about maybe let's because I want to be mindful of your time. We could talk for hours. Let's hit on two things. What do you see are so maybe a 3-part question, and you can take this however you want and go. When you transition from the private sector to now city, what were some of the head against the wall, just frustrations of being able, like you said, to kind of have the autonomy to move? And it's kind of like, an aircraft carrier is kind of the public sector. It's very slow to turn, very, things take longer. Things are longer because it's longer cycles. What were some of the frustrations for you that you had to kind of deal with now, especially in the city manager share? Mm-hmm. And what are some of the things that now you're like, you're leading the ship. Like, this is what you get paid to do. What's some of the exciting things? And really, in light of that flood, this is one of the things I highlight all the time. City management and just local government. You guys, it's not like you're sitting around twiddling your thumbs. There's always something to be doing. There's something that has to be done in the present moment to care for the city, to provide the services. But there's also work that you're trying to think, years, decades ahead, to infrastructure needs. Where are we going? How are we making the city continue to flourish? So you've got a lot on your plate. And then you have a chaotic crisis like a major flood. And it's not just like, we have flooding out here in Western Washington right now. It's just chaos. Cities are totally underwater right now. And people think that's on the news, and people will see that on the news. And then guess what? The news goes to something else 2 weeks later. It's on to 10,000 other stories. It's not like you just recover from a flood in a week. We just kind of clean up with our shovels. Right. Floods do massive damage. Not only damage, just the cleanup of silt and trees and debris. Right. It's a massive undertaking that your public works team. It's like, who does that? It's like the tooth fairy, right? It's like public works now not only had jobs to do before and demands, now we've got this huge project. Right. How do you do it as a city manager? What does that look like? Maybe open up our eyes to see how a town responds to that and where you're even at in that process. Because it's been a year and a half since the floods, but I bet there's still work ongoing from it. Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot to unpack there, Seth. Let's start with coming in to the process, right? So we flood on a Saturday, and the flood, we rise 8 foot in probably like 3 hours.
Mm.
And we crested at 22 feet. Flood stage is 10. Neighborhoods, we have flooded more than we have not flooded by clinical definition. In the last 15 to 18 years, we've probably flooded, let's say, 2/3 of those years. But when I say flooded, again, that's the technical river level. So houses aren't flooded. The town is able to handle that amount of water. We had never since 1953, and even then, 70% of the town that got flooded today, or a year ago, didn't exist in 1953. So like just the impact of knowing what it could do was not in the minds of the people who are walking in town, right? So the forecast was for 17 and a half feet, which is what we had in 2018, what we had in 2019. We handled that, and the crest was supposed to happen on a Sunday evening. And so that's what the plan was for, to put up a little bit of a berm protection and, same things we did in 2019. And at this time, like, I'm not involved in the city administration at this time. I'm just in the cemetery. And when I left being mayor, my outgoing direction to the staff was, I will be as absent as possible, but as present as needed. So I'm not a meddler. It's important not to be a meddler. And when I'm done, I'm done. And the feedback was always, oh, I can't believe you're going to be involved. I wasn't. Like, when I tell you I didn't watch a council meeting, I did not watch a council meeting. Like, I was done because I've learned about myself. I'm not really good at kinda. I got to be in or out. And, I just had to be out. So I was out. So leading up to the flood, like, I'm not involved in these conversations and the planning and, the things of that nature. I'm just doing my thing. Well, we flooded Saturday morning at 22 feet. We had prepared as a staff for Sunday evening at a level that people are familiar with that we can handle. And so, the morning of the flood, there's this disorientation, and people who've been in a flood that's beyond what a prediction is, the water is just coming. Like, you just don't know, like, how high is it going to get? So there's this fear of unknown. The town had, we think, between 700 and 800 water rescues on Saturday morning. It was just unbelievable. And I end up out at the cemetery trying to keep traffic out of the cemetery. Cemetery's flooded. A third of the cemetery's flooded. I launched a guy in a canoe across the eastern third of the cemetery to canoe into the neighborhood where his daughter and grandkids are. Just wild. And taking it in that day. And then for the next couple of days, one day I'm on the back of a garbage truck, running the hydros, picking up trash out of people's basements. We're hand loading this stuff into an old compactor garbage truck. And we've got flatbed trucks for mattresses and stuff like that. And then 2 different days, the parks director, who was my boss, we're taking porta pots around town because the wastewater treatment plant's offline, and people can't go to the bathroom anywhere except in a bucket. So we're driving around dropping porta pots, and so while I'm doing that stuff is when the EOC is forming and the key leadership is making their decisions, and the governor's coming, and things of that nature. So Thursday morning, so flood Saturday, Thursday morning, I'm in the excavator picking debris up out of front yards, putting it in the back of trucks. And this was in the morning, probably 8:20, 8:30 or so. Our HR director calls me and she says, Jessica, how fast can you get to City Hall? I'm like, well, I got to finish this house up. Let me get Egan's house on the corner, 15, 20 minutes, get the excavator around the corner. Yeah, I can be there within a half hour. And she's like, no. Like, how fast can you get here? And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, let me get out of the excavator. Let me reassign leadership roles on the team so nobody's hurt. We're safe. Let me get the excavator back over to the park across the street, and I'll leave the trailer on. I'll leave the X at the park, and I'll drive down to City Hall. I can be there in like 5 to 7 minutes. So I get down to City Hall and I talk to Dan Gifford, our city manager, the mayor, and our HR director. And they said, hey, could you do business communications? We've got a lot of information. We got to get out to businesses. We really don't have anybody to do that right now. You're a former business person in town. Like, could you do that? Sure. I'll do whatever you want. You just tell me what you want done, and that's what I'll do. So I go to the supply closet, get a notebook and a pen, and I come back and Jessica's door's shut. So I grab a chair and sit outside her office, just, waiting. And door opens up and two council people and the mayor, manager, and HR director are all in there. Two council people come out and they're like, well, congratulations. And they walk by and I'm like, okay. Walk back in the office. And then Dan, our city manager, had asked me, okay, I want you to run the disaster stuff and then I'll run the city. Sure, Dan, I'll do whatever you want. Well, then Dan, he kind of pulled me to the side and he said, hey, I've got a family situation going on right now. If I get bad news, I need to leave and I got to go to the eastern part of the state. I'm like, okay, just let me know. Well, the governor was coming that morning for a press conference with the Homeland Security and FEMA. And it was her second time in town. And mayor had to go out on the radio to do an interview, and the mayor wanted to walk around the south end of town. And I said, well, I can help you. I'll drive you around. We can walk together down there. Because I'd been down delivering porta pots previously, and I knew what it looked like. So I go down to the park where the governor is, of course, her whole entourage and everybody. And while that's happening, I got a phone call from the city manager, from Dan, and he said, I got to go. I'm like, okay. So I'm running everything. And brief the mayor on the situation. We end up driving around on the south end of town. We get into our emergency operations center meeting at 3:00 in the afternoon. Now, I have a beard about down to here at the time. I'm wearing a high-vis vest, t-shirt, shorts, steel-toed boots, and that's what I look like, okay? So I walk into the emergency operations center here in City Hall. I would say 2/3 of the people knew me and a third probably didn't. Now, our fire chief, who'd been here less than a year, he was hired after I was mayor. Okay. He does not, Jesse and I had talked for maybe 10 seconds at our mailboxes. Like he knows me as the guy that digs graves. Right. So when I come into the EOC, our police chief stands up and he's like, let's go. He's excited. And, our fire chief is just like paralyzed, turns to our HR director. Isn't that the guy that digs graves? What are we doing here? And I sat beside our EMA director and, I leaned over to him. And so what I'm trying to do in a leadership role right now is just an assessment. I'm not talking, I'm observing, because I gotta figure out essentially okay, what happened here that they called me in, and what level of where are these people at in the process? Because this has not been my process. This is their ship, right? I'm just walking into the ship right now. So I turned to our EMA director and I said, so Eric's his name, Eric Tigas. I said, hey, Tigas, are we inside or outside your binder right now? And he's like, dude, we are so far outside my binder. I just don't know. We're like this was a 4,000 year event is what it's calculated at. So I observe and, we do some things. And then Dan comes back in about 2.5 weeks, and resumes his role as city manager. I had made the decision. I asked the mayor, how long do you think you need me for? And he said, well, it's probably going to be at least 6 months, getting through this disaster stuff. I said, okay, then we need to replace me at the cemetery. We need 2 full-time people there. And he said, well, you're not going to give up your job, are you? I said, well, if you need me for 6 months, I need to resign as cemetery director. And then you should hire the person who's working with me right now, and then we can backfill his position. But yes, we should do that. I said, well, if we do that, you can't go back to that. I said, yeah, I understand, but that's what we need to do right now. And I just have the faith in, whatever works out like that. Well, we got to solve immediate problems right now. And so that's what we did. And here's what I'll tell you. So you talked about the wheels of government turn slow and all that. I will tell you, in a disaster recovery, in the immediate response, it is full tilt. Things run very fast. And it's like a no BS atmosphere. So decisions get made because they have to get made. You don't have the luxury of deliberation and time. And you have to decide, observe, adjust, decide, observe, and you're just deciding, observing, adjusting, deciding, observing, adjusting, right? For 2.5 to 3 months, it's like that. And I will tell you, for me, It's like an adrenaline rush. It was awesome. And I don't mean that in this, like the conditions weren't awesome, but the management atmosphere of it was awesome. So you're dealing with top tier, you're dealing with the upper level of the state of Iowa, you're dealing with the upper level of FEMA, you're dealing with no BS people, and you need to get no BS stuff done. And so there's just this like high level. The only time I ever experienced it was when those earlier journeys, when like we won that state title, like that was the focus of that team. Like we're not losing. Like we're getting it done. There's no BS. There's no excuses. You don't let your team members down. Like it was like that, but it was like that across multiple agencies, and it was like that in the room. So like nobody's feelings are getting hurt when you're having an intense conversation about how you put your town back together. Like you're just banging stuff out, right? And so there's a certain freedom and liberty that comes in those moments of everybody's baggage, personal differences, organizational differences, like whatever, they're gone. Like you are bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, figuring out food, shelter, water, medications, like you primal. You are delivering basic human need, right? And then you're trying to communicate out plans moving forward, like where to put debris from your house, impacted personal property. Like and terms are important, and when you communicate, how you communicate, the frequency, the medium, there's like all these problems to solve, right? It's just like this, right? And I love that kind of environment. And so like for me, it was like like in the movies when people hit themselves with like a shot of adrenaline, like it was like that. My wife asked me, what's it like? I'm like, it's awesome. Like there's no BS. Like everybody wants to accomplish what's best for the community. And like, that's what we're doing every day. And then as time goes on in the recovery process, you end up integrating into like a normal time flow, but that doesn't happen for 5, 6, 7 months. And, so my observation the day they brought me in, okay. And it began maybe talk about this for like 2 minutes. So I don't know what level we're in. I just know, one day I spent the day on the back of a garbage truck, and I took everything from somebody's house down to the grass, put it in the garbage truck. And when we took it to the sanitation department and I drove back in front of that house in 2 hours, the pile was bigger than what I picked up. Okay. This is significant. I don't know how, but like, this is significant. Spent 2 days delivering porta pots so people could go to the bathroom. Never done that before. This is different. And so Thursday, right after the EOC, our EMA asked me, do you care if I contact the state of Iowa Department of Transportation to help us with debris removal? Dude, I was in the back of a garbage truck one day. Yeah, let's get them here. So we got that lined up, and you find out in disasters that agencies don't come in and tell you what you need. You have to tell them what you need. Mm-hmm. And so that was the first big takeaway. Like, we don't give them problems and they solve them. We have to tell them the resources and the assets that we need to solve our problems. So you have to put requests in a ticket, and that ticket gets escalated up to the state level. And then they're mobilizing equipment and people to figure out where to, because it wasn't just us, it was all Northwest Iowa flooded. We're looking at our little fishbowl, but the state of Iowa is looking at, 20 some counties that flooded, and they all flooded to the level that we did. And so that evening, I got a call back from, I got a call from Scott McLean, who runs disaster recovery for the Department of Transportation for the state of Iowa. This would have been like early evening. And he said, just got your ticket. It's approved under the following conditions. And keep in mind, this is like June, 28th or something like that. And I'm like, okay, what do you got? And he goes, we got to run 12 hours a day. We got to run on Sundays. And I can't remember what he told me, 13,000 gallons of diesel a day or something. And I'm like, yes, sir, no problem. I'll get you that. He's like, okay, I'll call you back tonight. I don't know that I can deliver on any of those things. I pull our public works director in, and I'm like, hey, they're coming, but here's the deal. Like, we got to have this. Well, we own our own landfill, but you have to have a license to run the landfill. And, it's beyond our normal operating hours. We're not open on weekends. And I'm like, hey, not my problem to solve, your problem to solve. I'm telling you what we got to do. And so they solved it. They got it figured out. And then, I lined up multiple fuel options for him. And so he called me back at probably 9:15 at night. I was in a community meeting of leaders who were very concerned about the future of the town. And so I stepped out, took Scott's call. And so we went over different things, but towards the end of it, we find some mutual ground and just start having a conversation. Come to find out that he's retired military. Disaster response is what he did in his military career. Started in Iowa in the 93 floods and had been everywhere from, Puerto Rico to Haiti to Andrew to Katrina to, disasters. Like that's what he did. He mobilized response for disasters. And so the state of Iowa had done a flyover during the event. We saw that footage. Obviously had seen things in town during the recovery. And so I just asked him, have you seen the flyover footage? Yeah. He goes, I watched your water gauges get knocked off during the event. We were monitoring it. I said, have you talked to the governor? Yeah, talked to her twice. I said, okay, based on your real world experience and what you've seen and taken in from data and video and eyewitness accounts, what level of event are we in here? And he says, well, I'll tell you what you're not. I'm like, well, that's an interesting framing. And he goes, you're not Puerto Rico, you're not Haiti, you're not Andrew. And so when he first said that, I thought maybe he was joking, but then he's all business, right? He's just naming these disasters that were, and then he goes, I think from a damage impact perspective, you're going to be somewhere between Hugo and Katrina. So here I am in a dark bank office, 9:30 at night. He's telling me we're between Hugo and Katrina. And I'm in my head, I'm thinking, man, I saw nothing today from anyone, citizen, civic leader, nobody. I don't think anybody had the mental mindset that they're living right now in a community that's at the level of the damage of Hurricane Katrina. So now I have to figure out, how do I deliver that message and not just completely let it go off the rails? How does it not sound like an exaggeration? How does it sound? So part of that's got to be comforting because, hey, we are really in a very serious thing, but also setting expectations. So I have to set the expectations amongst the core staff of, hey, this is how we have to start thinking. We have to quit thinking like this is a flood that we can just fix. We are in a disaster to the level that we are not trained for, equipped for, prepared for. We need resources beyond what we have. And how do you structure that and deliver that in such a manner that you're not insulting our ability to respond, right? But by this time, the civic leaders are so just spent that, they're needing resources to come in, right? And so the state did, and it was probably the first big emotional lift that the community saw and experienced, because now all of a sudden, 72 orange DOT trucks are coming in with skid loaders and end loaders and teams, and we had maps for them, and they just banged it out. And I think that was really the first thing where people probably said, oh, this is different. This is okay. We know this is bad, but now we're scoping up to delivering the level of service that needs to be given, but we're also setting the expectation kind of long-term of, hey, this isn't my basement flooded and I got to tear some carpet out and put carpet back. I mean, this is lives ripped apart. This is trauma. This is, all these things are way beyond a flood. That's why I say it's a disaster. So, but even then, I'm still thinking I got to have some verification in my head that this is. So the FEMA individual assistance team leader was from Puerto Rico. He'd been 20 years FEMA, thick Puerto Rican accent. And I met him and just asked him, it's kind of my standard question, hey, where do you think we're at? And he told the story of when he saw where we were on a map, he scheduled one walking team of 4 to come do the individual assistance. Then, by the time he comes into town, people are hauling debris out to the curb. He sees the magnitude of it, the size of it. And he called back and got 3 or 4 more teams. Might have even been 5 teams. And he said, in my 20 years, I've never seen an appliance pile as big as the appliance piles that you have. And you have 2 of them. You have one on the south end of town and one on the north end of town. And I have never, ever seen anything like that. Now, part of that's because most of their disaster work is in the South. Not a lot of basements in the South. People in the Midwest love their basements because there's storage areas. Your washer dryer go out, you just kind of move them over, put new ones in, so part of that is that, right? But also I picked up a kind of mantra that, because this was happening a couple of days before the flood too, people were seeing areas flood, just things that they'd really just never seen before, like in their lifetime. And so I learned that if you're seeing things that you've never seen before, there's going to be things that happen that you've never experienced before. There's a causal link between these things. And I think as humans, we just get so dismissive of, you see something you've never seen before, and you're just like, oh, that's weird. Or, and you fail to start to link things together. And so anyway, that's just the story of my first day.
It's so wild. There's so many things we could go into. I want to be mindful of time though. So let's wrap with this, because again, the flood happens in June of 2024. Mm-hmm. It's so interesting to watch again, just like the the fire chief, the Frankenstein cemetery guy who works in the shadows at night is now leading the city. Who is this guy with this beard and this shorts? And I just love it. Yeah. And so you come in and you serve in this capacity now. Is then they go through a city manager search. We got to figure out what to do because that guy, he's not there. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure what the details are there. So then you get, you become the city manager in December 2024. Give us end with this. What is it now? Maybe the 2 things are, you mentioned that adrenaline rush. And I think that's the beauty of it. Shows actually the power of local government. Local government, when it needs to be responsive and let's do it, has an incredible ability to get the job done. Mm-hmm. It's kind of, sometimes it's that the non-pressure and we got plenty of time that can be its arch nemesis against itself. How have you, because you seem to like to run at a high, right? That entrepreneurial spirit. Let's go get things done. That football, let's win the championship. We can't be perfect, but we're going to strive to be perfect. Now, a year and a half after kind of the D-Day event of the flood of June, now in the city management seat for a year, how have you gotten used to a more regular pace? And what does it look like? What's it been like to lead now? Because again, the news has moved on. No one knows Spencer, Iowa, paying attention to, no one remembers some flood event unless you live there. Right. How is the recovery? What's on Spencer's agenda now as you lead a city, not only in recovery, but in its new day into its continued flourishing? So a couple things. People who do disaster response for a living, right? So the level of event that we had, like I mentioned before, we're getting A-team level people. Okay. A lot of even church mission type folks, we're not getting the church from 100 miles away. We're getting Billy Graham's team is parked here for 2 months, right? Samaritan's Purse. And when you talk to that level of person in multiple organizations, they would constantly say it's going to be 4 to 5 years you'll be dealing with this flood stuff. And you just can't. In the moment, you can't comprehend. I couldn't anyway. I can't comprehend that. No way. A year from now, this has got to be, kind of wrapped up. We still meet with FEMA every 2 weeks over our damages that occurred, during the flood. And these programs, so these funding programs, CDBG-DR, so Community Development Block Grant, Disaster Relief, HUD funds, they have a 6-year window of expenditure. EDA funds, 4 to 5 year window of expenditure. FEMA PA work scope, same kind of thing. So all of a sudden now, I got asked by a reporter
I can't remember how many months after the disaster, they were putting a presentation together for a seminar about small town resiliency. And so they asked me essentially like, well, when will you be recovered? And my answer was, I don't think you ever recover from an event like this. You move on from an event like this. There's a difference. You know, you're on a trajectory. There's a day of the event and your trajectory changes. You never reset back to what that was. You know, we're going to demo 40 homes. You don't recover from that. You move forward from that. And I think that's just it's just a different, it, I explain it like this, that, 65% of the town flooded. There's 700 to 800 boat rescues. And essentially what transpired that morning of the flood was a series of near-death experiences that tore people apart to the very core fabric of their being. Like one of my son's friends is sleeping in a basement. They had a house by the river, and he's woken up at 6:30 in the morning because the wall collapsed and the river is literally like pouring onto him in his bed. The stories of one family got rescued out their kitchen window, and one little girl was 4 or 5, and now when she goes to school, she has a little backpack, and she keeps all her like key things in her backpack because she's afraid she might lose everything again. There's just like all these things, and so you just try to go forward, making the best decisions you can for recovery, resiliency, and protection in the future. And these are long-term things. So strategically, what I did was, one of the first things, Cedar Rapids, Iowa flooded significantly in 2008. And I called my friend Mark Jackson. Actually, this came from Dan, I guess. Dan knew Cindy Fowler, who was the retired deputy city manager in Cedar Rapids. And he said, get a hold of her. So I did, begged her over an hour-long conversation, like, can you come out here and be here for like 2 or 3 days? And I'd like you to do 3 things. I'd like you to drive around town, see the level of damage we have. I would like you to interview my staff, key leaders, and do a personality workup and a aptitude workup essentially on them. And then 3, I want you to give a recommendation to me when you take those 2 things and you mix them together, and knowing the workflow that's going to come through City Hall. Are we staffed correctly? Do we have the right people? And like, what do I need to be prepared for? And she did. And she did it on her own dime. And it was probably the most valuable management pivot that could have happened early on, to take that institutional knowledge that she had and that work experience that she had. And, she reminded me, so this was 24, right? 2008 was the major flood. Cedar Rapids still does not have their flood wall system completely in place. And, like, hey, Kevin, this is a long-term thing. Like, okay, that was like super beneficial to me. And we made management decisions because of it. We figured out where we needed to add resources into what departments, and, what we could handle internally, what we couldn't handle internally, and things of that nature. So that was critically important. And then you get this kind of unwinding and kind of flow into the natural rhythm of government. And I would say we're 85% there. So this 15% gap is now like that urgency of decision making isn't there, but now these long-term decisions of these programs, housing decisions and infrastructure decisions, and how to budget. Now all of a sudden, most municipalities got to worry about 2 things: your operational budget and your capital improvement program, right? Like, essentially, those are the 2 components of a municipal budget. Well, now all of a sudden, we have layered in these disaster recovery projects, and then the timing of reimbursement for those. And, when you start lapping 3 and 6 year timelines on stuff, and money costs you money. So you have a project that might be, 85% government funded, but if that's a $20 million project, maybe you can't necessarily afford the 15% backfill for that. So then you got to start to analyze, is the juice worth the squeeze? Like, what level of risk are we trying to mitigate here? What level of event did we actually have? What's the percentage that might happen again? Like all these the Iowa Flood Center has been invaluable, working with us on different flood models and inundation model. We developed an app. You can go to the Google store or the Apple store right now, search City of Spencer. You'll find our app. That app was a direct outcome of this event. It's got all of our normal news feed, videos, meetings, but then there's a weather portion. It ties into the live river conditions. The flood warning system is on there. It's free to download. We did that as an outcome of getting information out to people sooner. We've contracted with Rick Rowe, who's a retired fire chief in Clive, Iowa, the Des Moines area. He came up and did an after action report for us, did a whole flood warning system plan for us. So we're the outcomes from that event, and now it's integrating all of that into moving forward. And
a ton of work that, again, it's not like you're sitting around twiddling your thumbs looking for something to do, and people just don't understand the expanse of what the local government's up to. But like, I think one of the points too is people will say, well, man, like, again, the floods are happening in Western Washington. And when I was a kid, the lower valley, our ranch was up on top of the hill. The lower valley would always flood. Now we had a crazy flood. I think it was early 90s. Just nuts. It was probably one of those 100-year floods. And I remember, okay, what are we going to do? And there was a response, but it's not like you just have like endless bags of money to throw around and build out the perfect protection so that it will never, happen again. It's people don't understand the cost and the expanse. And like you said, it's one thing for this big state national grant to come in, but it doesn't cover all of it. So then where do you still have the day-to-day things that you're trying to get done, and the other things that have to, it's just so many things that people, we don't understand. We take it for granted. And so that's why I love you sharing the stories, just to give us a little more spotlight on the realities of the things you have to juggle in city management to, again, provide the things that we take for granted in just this modern, comfortable life that we live. And so thank you for serving, man. So many things we could go into. I want to be mindful of the time because we're going to hit 2 hours here.
My time's your time.
Wrap it.
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, right. We'll wrap it up. Help us. What do you think is being now in the chair for a year, and in light of all that you've had to do, again, with a flood, with all the other things that you're doing, what do you think is something to encourage? What do you think is one of the most challenging things you have to face as a city manager? Maybe it's not even the flood. Maybe it's just the craziness of the toxicity that's flowing from a national level down to the local, where people have to, there could be all kinds of things. What do you think is a challenge you're currently facing? But what are you excited about as well? What are you going, man, this is why I'm staying in the chair. This is what has me pumped up to be the city manager, Spencer.
So the single biggest variable we face right now is the property tax reform movement in Iowa by the state legislature and the government, and the uncertainty of how municipal services are funded moving forward. And that has not been the public discussion point. The public discussion point has been, Joe and Jane need to save money and pay less in property tax. And I am fully supportive of that. I'm freeing up personal income. Cash flow is a good thing. When we deal with our state senators and legislators, I typically lead the conversation with, take our property tax to zero. I don't care. I truly don't care about property tax. I care about the expected services and delivering those that people have. And then we can talk about, once we established a level service, then we can talk about how we fund those. But if we only have the conversation over here about reducing the property tax burden, which means reducing revenues that we currently bring in, if we don't also have a conversation about, is there the expectation that when this revenue goes down, something else comes in, to replace that, or is it just down? And my approach maybe is a little different than some career, city managers, from the standpoint of, for 15 years, when you run startup companies and you flip companies and you sell companies, the money portion of the company is where you live. You're constantly cutting, trimming, all this kind of stuff. So like that portion of it does not scare me. What does concern me is it fundamentally is a change of what we're able to deliver to the community. And so those are the conversations that we're going to have in this budget cycle with staff, with the public, with the elected officials. That's the biggest challenge. What excites me, I would say, is whether people want government or not, they utilize government. So also, the understanding, this is another thing that excites me, the difference between, not all governments are created equal. So like the federal government is different than the state government, which is different than the county government, which is different than the local government. And I always tell people our local department budgets are literally wages, vehicle repairs, maintenance on property, and maybe some conferences and insurance benefits, and essentially office supplies. That's our budget. We don't have these, crazy funds, and, we don't print money either. So a lot of times, you'll see, well, the city should do this and the city should do that. And okay, but, we, our revenues come from taxation. So really what you're saying is you want more, but you want to pay less. And I believe those two things cannot be true at the same time. So for example, not long ago, I had a conversation with somebody who lives across from one of our larger parks, and they were not happy at the level of aesthetics that the park looked. And I told them that I can make your park look like a golf course, like I literally can, and I'm not being flip. Like I can make your park look like a golf course. All I need is more money and more people, and I can make that happen. But most people don't want to pay more money to have that happen, and so we try to balance that out. We try to deliver the most affordable service that we can, for the best return on investment of the tax dollar. I don't know if you're still there, Seth. There he is.
Oh, there you are. Sorry,
I wore you out.
My internet just paused. Take it from you said you can make your park. You're talking about the
I said, we can make the park look like a golf course. I literally can, and I'm not being flip about that. Like we could make it look as well manicured as you want. I only need more time and more people and more money. And the time thing is easy to solve. We only get the amount of time we get. I just need more money and more people. And most people don't want to put more money into the services, right? And I tell our staff all the time, we currently live in this municipal world of, hey, get off my lawn. What are you going to do for me? And it's this especially like you said, what excites me. I think what excites me the most is probably more like what intrigues me the most is this environment of the expectation of government to do economic development. So this is really like a 1990s and beyond thing, and it really kind of like got on steroids in the 2000s with low interest rates and things like that. And I was asked recently like what I meant by that, and I said, if you showed up at a 1940s city council meeting in Spencer, Iowa, I don't think any business owner is walking into that council meeting asking for tax incentives or asking for grant money to expand jobs or to build homes. That's not hasn't always been here kind of thing. That's a recent thing. And I think governments are now having to adjust to that. The economy is different now.
Well, I think it goes right to your point. It's like we want to pay less, but we want more incentives for our thing. Like, it's like you cannot, and there is a break coming, I think, because you mentioned this in Iowa. Washington State's the same way. Washington is under a massive, every city manager I talk to talks about the funding, and the state's only trying to take less away. And they're like, well, we can't even deliver the services people want now. People are just complaining continually. And yet the state wants to charge here an income tax, which they can't do. And so it's just interesting. So there it is. It's just interesting to watch the dynamics of federal, state, local. And again, it's usually the local. That's why I love what I'm doing here, is because it's the local that impacts you on the day to day. And yet the local just takes the brunt, I think, of state drip down, of national drip down. And we got to turn that around. I think somehow we got to give our local governments is the government of the people, for the people, by the people. It impacts people on a day-to-day basis. It's got to become the center again of how are we serving these people and how are we building actual community.
It's a real thing. When I was growing up in the 80s, municipal service was a very noble thing. And, somehow this narrative has turned more into almost like you're looked upon as a municipal worker as either lazy or stealing tax money, like stealing other people's hard-earned money. And, we're doing an efficiency study at the landfill in our sanitation department right now, just to see, how are we doing, right? And I sure hope that narrative changes. But I wanted to show you just a quick picture. I'll hold it up here to the webcam. So I'm going to show you the guy that walked in to that EOC meeting. It's not the guy that you see on here. So that's the.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I gotta, you have to send me that picture because again, I might actually have to use the video for this. We're not using the video yet. We're going to soon, but
yeah,
I want to put that picture up. That is so good. Oh man, Kevin, what a story and what impact you're having. I love it. I love that you took the jump and you said, okay, again, you asked people, do I think I have the chops for this? You don't have the MPA. You're not like, I didn't go to school for this. I don't have hey, let's just try. Let's do it. Mm-hmm. Let's get some validation I love that. You got some validation from people who had been in the chair to say, yeah, I think you have the chops. Let's go. And you did it. You raised your hand. And obviously they're rewarding that action. So
yeah, and I can only be as successful as the quality of our team is, right? We have a really good team of department heads. We have a good city council. We have a great community. It's a place that you can be successful in. And, I'm really just a facilitator and a steward of process. That essentially is what it comes down to. And, we're really only as effective as the decisions we make and the strategies we choose, and as successful as the people who are around us. And so in order to be successful in this chair, it's really just a reflection of the success of the people in the entire organization. It's a good place to be.
Well, it takes a leader, right? And that's why I love, it seems, I always think of Kevin Phelps, city manager in Glendale, Arizona, who's about to actually retire. He says, I'm not the CEO, I'm the CCO, I'm the Chief Culture Officer. Mike Land says, I'm the Chief Reminding Officer, right? Someone's got to remind people of the vision, of the mission, keep them on task, keep them in a spirit of collaboration instead of, separation, doing their own things. And so it seems like you're doing that, and you're doing it well. And so thanks for sharing your life, your leadership journey, and your insights with us today.
Happy to do it. Thanks for the opportunity.
The stories we share here on the Halting Winter Podcast are part of something bigger, a movement to remind us where government truly lives. No, not in Washington, D.C., but right here at home, where we live, where we work, and where we play. Because it's in our cities, our counties, and our communities that the real work of democracy happens. And when local government thrives, people thrive. If this conversation inspired you, take a small step that makes a big difference. Subscribe to the podcast, share the episode, and follow along on social media. Every click helps amplify the stories that build pride, purpose, and belonging in local government. To learn more about the Halting Winter Project and how you can be part of the work that builds belonging, visit HaltingWinter.com. I'm Seth Winterhalter, and until next time, this has been the Halting Winter Podcast.